And we're back with another part of explorations with the new sky filter, which will allow us to create cloudy scenes, skies with clouds. Something we don't see much in California. So, well, at least not here in Southern California. What I'm going to do actually today is not in Howler. You see here at the top, it's Artist 2023, based on the same code, but without the animation. Right? So we're going to use this simply to have also a little bit of a promotion for PD Artist. But of course, if you have PD Howler, the full version from which PD Artist is derived as a subset, you have the same capabilities and you have even more because you'll be able to run animations. We'll cover that in other tutorials. So today I want to simply cover what's in this main interface. Right. And in fact, one thing, if we have made changes and you want to reset back to software default, you can click the little X button here and that will close the window, but also reset it so that next time you start, if you want to go with something original without any changes, starting like this here, we'll come back to the default settings. And so there's a couple of things we can notice here. There's different types of cloud distributions, sort of a Perlin noise approach. Turbulence is the default, right? Rigid and maximized. I'm going to stay with the turbulent one for now. There's also colors here at the zenith, that's way above our head, and then the horizon, we can have different colors. So we can have, for example, kind of a dark blue with a lot of saturation up here, and then perhaps a bit more foggy at the horizon. Something like this, a little bit even more whitish, or maybe even a little bit more reddish. If we have the sun coming down low, we might want to have a reddish or orange color. But keep in mind that if you change the settings here, there's one called the time. As you change this, this will reset it to its own set of colors. And you can see that right now here, the colors are changing to a different blue as I'm moving. So you can click inside these numbers and click and drag and quickly change it. The initial view orientation, you're pointing towards the west, so to speak. You're looking to due west. And if you go to the end of the hour here, 24 hours, actually a little bit before that is when sunset happens. So 6 or 7, 1900, you'll see the sun appearing down there. And as it goes down further, the sky colors will change as well. So keep that in mind. If you touch this thing here, any settings you do here explicitly will be overridden. At least some of them. The absorption, maybe not, but you can certainly see the sun color changing, the horizon color, and the zenith color. Absorption will indicate, will control or will have an effect on the clouds. All right, so let's continue this exploration. Iterations, what does that do? That's iterations of rendering and or refinement of the cloud shapes, the cloud geometry. This is a volumetric cloud system, and as we will see, we can make it very rough in the rendering or a little bit more detailed. And that might be something that, of course, it will take extra time in rendering it. So you got to be careful not to go overboard here. The scale, that's the size of the clouds. Now, if you go down with that, it's going to be tiny little clouds and more of them. There's other parameters controlling, where they actually appear, how separate, how much gaps there are in between. In fact, the lacunarity, that's the next parameter there, that affects that's actually literally a space or a gap, the definition, like a lake. And so that's, I don't know, maybe we could reverse that. The bigger it is, the smaller the distance. Maybe we tie it to the size of the objects around the lakes, around the gaps. But it's essentially the distance between the clouds, right? The gaps between the clouds. And so that's something that you can look. It's kind of similar to one further down here, the coverage, but let's get back to that in a second. There is a persistence. Now, that one I'm not quite sure how to describe. I'll have to check with the expert here. Essentially, this might relate to how persistent the shape is and whether it's undergoing any sort of changes in transformation, especially during animation, but maybe it's something completely different. So I will just say, well, there is that parameter, and if you like what it does, you might find it interesting to consider as well, something to try and play. There is the coverage. Okay, so that one will be kind of similar to lacunarity, but it is not based on the gap between the clouds, but simply on the clouds. I mean, there's some similarity to the effects you get from that. And then there is also one more thing, which is the height of, or the thickness of the clouds. All right, so if you have enough gaps in between, let's say something like this here, you can see that when you increase the thickness, it will, they will appear taller and higher, and they may also cast shadows more easily on neighboring clouds. So that's something to experiment with as well. There you go. Let's go a little bit more on, let's see, iterations is good. Persistence, let's go back to a little bit more like this. All right, so what other parameters? On the right column here, we have the absorption. So many of these parameters on the left side will affect the shapes. The right side will affect more of the rendering aspect, the colors, the hue, the appearance of them, not in terms of the shape, but more in terms of the coloring. So there's absorption, and that indicates how much and what kind of color gets absorbed. Essentially, we have clouds here, some water molecules, if you want to think of that, and what we control with that is how much the light from the sun is being absorbed. And if you go down to zero, well, then that light is being scattered in all directions and there's no absorption. You can also say, well, maybe it's not absorbing it in a particular, in the default color, maybe you want the blue to be absorbed. Right, so you can set it to blue for the absorption color, and then the colors will, the clouds will take on sort of a reddish tint, because that's the other side of the spectrum that remains visible. There's also a phase option here, which is kind of interesting if you want to give it less of the contrast. Looks a little bit more like a rainy day on its way here, or a little bit more high contrast. There's a couple of ways to explore those. Combine the two, absorption and phase, and then there's ambient, right? The coloring from the sky, the ambient lighting here can also affect the appearance of these clouds. There is another parameter here, which is a sun glare. Now, you won't see it if the sun is far away, right? You have to be looking at the sun. Now, right now, if the glare is really big, you can see a little bit of it. I want to see if I can, oh yeah, it's back here. You can go to increase the sun glare. Let's go and perhaps change the last parameter here, there. All right, so you can make it a fairly small sun glare, or you can make it fairly big, especially if it's down at sunset. You might want to increase the size a little bit. And that almost finishes it here. So there is also the fog distance here, and you can see it just went a little bit farther, but we don't have really an infinite distance here available for the fog. Just a little bit to control how far these clouds are actually going to be visible. There is one more thing that you will want to experiment with, and that's the sun. So the time at which raises the sun or brings it down. And if it's below the horizon, then the clouds will go dark. But if you see it here, it's going past the cloud level and then up higher, and then eventually you won't see the cloud the sun, unless you turn your head up and try to find it there. You can't do a full 180 to the other side. It's kind of constrained looking in this one direction. By default, you're looking towards the west, and the sun is a little bit behind you because the time is not in the afternoon hours. All right, so it's a little bit like this, something like this, maybe noonish. And let's see, default probably has more absorption, a little bit less on this, a little bit less on the ambient. And so now, with the time increasing, the sun, you can imagine it turning over your head and eventually coming back down the other side. Right, and these are fairly dark clouds right here because I added some absorption. I did reduce the phase. So there's a number of different types of clouds or appearance that you could gain from that. So that's about it. Finally, when you're done with this preview, you'll want to render that. You'll click OK, and then again in the upper right zone here, you'll see a progress bar if it's slow enough. It probably will take a second or two to render. And then that's it. That's the rendering we just did now with the new sky filter. Thanks for watching, and we'll probably have some more on this, experimenting with animations as well.